Thanks everyone for coming out for this talk. To start us off, I can just say a little bit about myself. I try to do this talk every year for almost about the last 15 years. And this year I did try to do some other research. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but just tell you kind of who I am for those that don't know. Charlie Orphanides. I'm currently teaching 8th grade, class teacher. I've been the education director for the last 2 years, and before that I was a movement teacher here at the Denver Waldorf School, and before that a class teacher before that, then a movement teacher and a math teacher before that at a school at Boulder Valley Waldorf School up in Boulder. And before that I started my career teaching at the Brooklyn Waldorf School, and I took a class from 5th through 8th grade there in Brooklyn. So I've kind of done a little bit of a lot of things. And the other thing that's good for this talk, it's been very interesting, because like I said, I gave this talk before I was a parent for many years. And now I'm a parent of a 10-year-old. So the 9-year change talk has new relevance to me. And I like to think that a lot of things that I said were pretty accurate. What I was taught, what I learned from my own observations with other people's children, I found out were true with my own 10-year-old. And I also have, so I have a 4th grader who's 10 now at the school, and a 7-year-old 1st grader, both of course at the school. So that's a little bit about me. These are my in-laws. No pressure. And my mentor, of course. So we're going to talk about the 9-year change and the 12-year change today, which to look into some different ways of talking about these things and working with them. I Googled both of them. And one of the things I found very inspiring and a little disheartening is as I'm trying to research other developmental psychologists or educators, what you find about these periods in child development is not very inspiring outside. So it's one of those, I had one of those moments that happen to me often as I try to research more than just what Rudolf Steiner says, because I do a lot of reading of Rudolf Steiner. And I try to research more of it, what other people have to say, and it rarely is as even nearly as inspiring as the insights that Rudolf Steiner has into this way that the human being is developing. Not just there's a lot of stuff about how they're developing as a physical person, and there's things developing kind of what they'll show you on the outside, kind of, oh, they might do this, or they might act like this, or they might be ready to learn this. But very little has any real inquiry into what is happening within the human being, what is happening within the developing child. And that's one of those places where again and again I come to those gifts that Rudolf Steiner gave us about the developing human being, what could possibly be happening inwardly, in which, of course, and he talks a lot about with what he would call spiritual research, spiritual science. You can't prove that with our eyes and with some meter. You can't test those things. The only way you can test them is through observations and living with them, and then through maybe a certain kind of different type of knowing that you have, which comes somewhere closer to something you might call intuition. So these things are very hard to validate, and yet the more you learn about these, the way what a human being is experiencing inwardly at different stages of development, the more you can start to observe them and grow a deeper relationship to the children, to the people that you are working with, and ultimately to yourself and to the greater society as a whole. And that's the whole goal, is as we understand the 9-year-old more, we understand ourselves more, and we might understand someone who holds a political office more or something. We might be able to reach greater empathy for all kinds of people who we might not agree with in different ways, and we can start to create, as we understand the inner development of the human being and the things that we're all going through. So we're going to do a few things. I'd like to do a little movement exercise. It's not too extravagant or aerobic, but it's a little something that I want to try out this time that I haven't done before. The first exercise I always like to do at the beginning of these talks is just ask you all here, what is the first, if you think of your childhood, especially your elementary school experience, not necessarily at school, but that age, what's the first memory that pops into your mind? And if someone would be so brave as to share whatever comes to you, the first thing, like, oh, I remember such and such. Yeah.
Those long tube lights that, like, when you turn them on, they kind of buzz and they kind of flicker. That's the first thing I think of.
Do you remember where you were or when you were
Probably my second grade classroom.
Yep, second grade. Okay, anyone else? Anything? Yeah.
I remember writing my name backwards on the wallpaper. It said Mott. Tom.
How old do you think you were then?
Probably 3.
3. Okay.
The red crayon wallpaper.
Good. Anything else? Anything else come to anyone?
Was either kindergarten or first grade, a boy named Joey Batista punched me in the belly. It was a horrifying experience, to say the least.
Yeah. Okay, good. So we have these different developmental stages. There's always usually some kind of stage. Often when I ask that question, a lot of the answers that come are around 9 years old that big things happen. And you'll find it time and time again that if there are divorces in a family, often happens around when a child is 9 years old. When there may be a death in the family, someone who's a grandparent, often happens around 9. Someone will often say, oh, that's when I moved schools. I went to a different school. Around 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade. Often happens. So in the little story that I always tell about my 9-year change is I had a teacher whose name was Mrs. Jones. And she had very long pinky fingernail. Some of you may have heard this story before, with which she would pick her nose. Like a shovel. And of course, then roll it like this. I remember it so vividly. So that was part of it, as Mrs. Jones. I was in 3rd grade at the time. And the other thing is, I decided one day when I was 9 years old in 3rd grade, while I had Mrs. Jones, she was also one that said, when you said, can I go to the bathroom? She would say, I don't know, can you? That was Mrs. Jones. Best joke ever, right? But when I was in 3rd grade, I decided one day that I was going to start swearing, like using curse words. I don't know where it came from, but I went out to behind our school was where we had recess. There was a low sloping hill with stairs up the middle and grass on either side, and then a long flat field where we would play football and soccer and all these things. Got charged up the hill, went and started playing the game, and every other word I said was just a swear word. It didn't matter. It was kind of like the Smurfs, like a Smurf. F this, A that, S this. I really had no context or form to my swearing, and the whole game just swore for whatever, the half an hour recess. And then I kind of stopped swearing after that. But that was my gesture of like, I'm going to do this. I'm right here and now, here now. And that was kind of, I didn't become a big swearer after that. But that was one day. In my memory, it was one day. I think it really was one day. So that was my experience. That's what kind of my picture of the 9-year change. That I had to state my individuality and my presence as a unique person who's making their own decisions, and I had to state it, and that's the way I chose to state it at that particular time. And that's a vivid memory that lives with me to this day. So before we get into some more things, we'll do a little, if we could stand up and form a circle, we're going to just do a little exercise together. If we could, the stairs, this room is terrible for movement. We have meetings in here all the time, but we're going to make it do anyway. So we're going to stand in a circle. If we can we're going to start out holding hands. I'm going to describe to you what we're going to do. See if I can give you a picture of kind of what it might feel like as a person experiencing the 9-year change. So I'll take Tom's hand in just a moment, and we're going to lead you in, and we're going to kind of walk around in a circle, then we're going to spiral in. We might need to use that. And then we're going to spiral in, when we get to the center, I'm going to turn around, and we're going to go back out, and we're going to drop hands when we start. As soon as you're facing outward, you're going to drop hands. And then I'll tell you when to stop. Okay? We'll go from there. So we're just going to go... We're going to go this way, so we're walking in. I'm going to walk around this way, yep, just following the circle. So you're going that way. Yep. So you can look around, see each other, like, hi everyone. One big happy family. Yeah. So we're coming in. So I'm going to, yeah. So when I get to here, you keep holding hands. We're going to keep walking though. We're going to continue following. Drop hands when you turn outward. Yep. And you may have noticed you've turned outside, so now you're not facing the inside of the circle any longer. You're facing outside, and you drop hands. And just hang with there for a minute. It's not fair because I have a baby, though. Good. Okay. Great. Good. You can go ahead and sit down. We might do one more little movement exercise later. Depends how sleepy you all end up. But so that little exercise was something I was thinking about. That's something we do with the children in younger grades. This idea that we're in a circle, we're all together, we have this, we're looking at one another. But then we can also find ourselves all of a sudden turning inside out, and we find ourselves, that's why I had us drop hands. All of a sudden I can't see anyone else in my circle. The circle's still there. But I can't see anyone any longer, and I'm looking out. I was looking at a beautiful baby. But we're generally looking out into kind of a vast nothingness. So the argument I would make is that's the experience of the child at around 9 years old. And when we say the 9-year change, that could be really anywhere from 8 to 10-ish. It's not like, oh, they turn 9 and they're going through this. It's rarely, it might work that way for some children, but rarely is it like that. In some places, Rudolf Steiner talks about it at the end of the 9th year. Other places, he talks about it more in the middle of the 9th year, so it depends. So any time around there. And that idea, what Rudolf Steiner tells us about this 9-year change, from a very basic level, is that the child first truly experiences themselves as completely separate from the rest of the world. Before the 9-year change, they feel as though they are really a part of everything that is around them. And Steiner even says in some of these lectures that he knows that he's not the music stand. You know, the child knows that. Oh, he doesn't think like, I am a music stand, and music stand is me. Not exactly that. But the fact that this isn't part of my world completely is not really, they're not aware that it's actually separate. They know it's a music stand, but it's my music stand. It's all truly a part of them. And around 9 years old, they feel this first gesture of, I am really separate from the world. And how that manifests, as a teacher, especially as a class teacher, I would always joke at the beginning of, say, 3rd grade, end of 2nd grade, dear parents, when your child, you'll notice as your child goes through this 9-year change, they will come home and they will talk about all the bad things I am doing as their teacher. You will hear them complain about me. And I also say, dear parents, I will also hear them complain about you. So you have to know that's going to have, they have this new sense of being critical of other people, especially adults in their lives. And this gesture from what we teach out of from age 7 to 14, and I'll get to these developmental phases in a moment, that Rudolf Steiner tells us we have to teach out of what's called loving authority, meaning that the reason that the children are learning from me as a class teacher from 1st to 8th grade, from ages 7 to 14, is because they see me as a loving authority. And that actually allows them to develop in a healthy way as they grow older. So that's different from kind of a disciplinarian, authoritarian, which is a very different gesture, but a really loving authority, someone who can stand as a representative of the world, is another way Steiner put it. And that they look to their teachers in this time, they really have to do that in order for the development to progress in a healthy way. But then when they hit that in the middle there, at this around age 9, there has to be a little bit of a shift that the teacher or the adult, the parents, has to notice that. So you have to enter into a little bit more of a relationship with them where you're listening to them, you're speaking to them in a little bit of a different way. And know that they will be criticizing you and all the clothes you wear, and Mr. Freeze, you wore those pants yesterday. So they will start to notice those things because there is this real separateness happening at this 9-year time. Let's just quickly, I'm going to give the speed version of the developmental phases that we talk about in Waldorf schools because it's really important for this. So we call this the bathtub of life, some people. Life doesn't really end at 63. Rudolf Steiner tells there are certain things that really do change after 63, that your relationship, well, he talks about your relationship to karma really changes after 63, that you've kind of moved past something related to kind of all the things you had to do in life. So 0 to 7 is the first development. Our first course developmental phase is while we're in utero, before we're born onto earth. And then 0 to 7 is where we're really developing our physical body. We're really developing our physical body. And then 7 to 14, we're really developing what Rudolf Steiner calls our life body, or our etheric body, which is what vitalizes us, what forms us, but also allows us to learn. And then 14 to 21, Rudolf Steiner calls this the development of the astral body, which is also you can call the soul body. You can think of the life of feelings as a very simplified version of that. And then we get into other more subtle stages here, 21 to 28, 28 to 35, with 33 kind of being the apex. I'm not going to get into all these, but that's a whole other class as you go through these 7-year phases. So we have 7-year phases throughout life. And that's a whole other story about when we get past them. But the one from, especially in the grades, we talk about 7 to 14. And this is where, within that 7-year development, we have these nodes of 9 and 12, which are pronounced developmental kind of shifts. I call them nodes. There's big changes that happen in here. And this is the grades 1 through 8. And that's why, and so here we're developing this life body. Really developing kind of the forces that live us. And one of the main things that we need for developing that is rhythm, which I don't know if you know, in the Waldorf schools we say the morning verse every morning. And every day we say, and there's this idea that all over the world, there's Waldorf schools all over the world, and at every hour of the day, during every hour of the day, somebody is saying the morning verse as you go across time zones. So you have all around the world during the day, you have someone saying the morning verse. One of those ideas that we have this rhythm keeping us through this time. So at age 7, some of these forces get set free that allow us to be able to learn and have this capacity for memory, which comes from the same forces that build up our physical body, which is a very interesting idea that Rudolf Steiner gives us. And that's why we try to wait until age 7 with the change of teeth before we start 1st grade. Because once we see the teeth changing, that we're starting to lose teeth and get new teeth, we know that something is really changing in the way that their physical body is working. And a part of their development has completed. And Rudolf Steiner gives us the idea that then, only once those physical forces are those life forces are let go from developing the physical body in such an intense way, they're freed for us to remember things and to be able to learn things. And if you have had a first grader, you can really see this new, when they get to about 7, you see this new capacity for them to learn, and they can actually sit in the classroom and they want to write things, and they want to hear, and they want to learn to read, and these new forces have really awoken in them. So those things go, and then right around age 9 comes this big shift where they really do say that they are different from us. I'd like to read a little bit of what Rudolf Steiner said here. This interesting way that Steiner phrases this, which has struck me a lot in the last few years. He says that they have these keen observations, like I mentioned. They're observing, oh, you haven't changed this, or you're doing this. They're also become critical of us. But they become wrapped up in an entire system of inner questions that burden their souls. And I had a few before, and I've read this before, but a few years ago, this really landed on me that, and if you know a 9-year-old, who has a 9-year-old right now, or an 8 or a 10-year-old? Okay, so some of you have it coming, you have to look forward to this. And of course it appears in different ways, but to think that it's not just that they're critical or that they feel separate, but inwardly in their soul, they're really weighed down by this sense of separateness. No matter how they represent it to you or in their actions, that there's a burden that they're carrying. And we can think of that burden of like, I live in this world and I'm separate from the world. I'm a unique individual. Which in some ways is liberating, right? In other ways, it's like, I'm a unique, like it's up to me. Like this whole thing comes in the way now that they can be critical of that world, weighs on them in a burden, as a burden, a soul burden. There's a deep loneliness that can come with that. And that loneliness and that kind of quality of burden and even sadness is not always evident, but I like to talk about that because if you can carry that inwardly in you when you're dealing with them saying, I don't want to go to bed, or what, like they're still lying on the couch when you told them 18 times to get their jacket on to go to school, that you can have something inside of you that's like, okay, there's something going on here, and you can just shift a little something within you. And as teachers and as parents or as caregivers or whatever it might be, that little change that you can make within yourself, even if outwardly you're still like, please get up and put your jacket on. If you've done a little movement inwardly, then that changes everything between the relationship between you and the child. And they won't say anything. They won't say thank you out loud. But inwardly they're saying thank you for noticing that. And also they're saying, thank you for making me get my jacket on. You know, that again, those sense of boundaries, we'll talk more about kind of that moving forward. And it's funny, as I was Googling, this article came up that caught my eye. I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And again, of course, it was by Dr. Adam Blanning, who's a member of our community and the anthroposophical doctor. I was like, that's a cool article. Oh, yeah, that's Adam. But his article is called The Unique Anxieties of the New 9-Year Change. And what he points to in this, which relates to this burden, is nowadays, often around 9 years old, children will be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And Adam Blanning is an MD. He's an anthroposophical doctor, meaning that he has gone through medical school. He's a full MD, but he's also done this extensive training in anthroposophical medicine. So he studies the human being in a little bit different way and can still prescribe you antibiotics and won't do that when necessary. But so he sees a lot of patients, and a lot of 9-year-olds end up in his office because parents are freaking out, what's wrong with my child? And they bring them to Adam, and he's able to work with them. But a lot who don't get to see Adam or don't get to kind of be a part of a Waldorf community will think, what's wrong? Like, there is an anxiety, a nervousness that crops up around this time, and it can be scary for the adults in these children's lives. And Adam's saying, Dr. Blanning is saying that he sees a lot of that, and don't necessarily jump to that conclusion. Because this change, this feeling of burdensome, this feeling of anxiousness about being alone in the world, being unique in the world, is an absolutely necessary stage in human development. So our job is to support them through this change, to work with them through it, to still create healthy boundaries, loving boundaries, be that loving authority, but not, hopefully not to directly go to something like a path of medication or a path of talk therapy, which might over-intellectualize them in a where they're already becoming hyper-intellectualized. So to be wary of that. Of course, there's extreme circumstances where maybe for your particular child or the child, of course, things happen, and there may be extreme cases. He also points to 3 other things that happen along with this, that go along with these changes, which I thought was just fascinating. Obsessive compulsive behaviors can appear, which can be partly viewed as adaptation for controlling vulnerability to the outside world, where the nervous system gets stuck in looping worries. So signs of OCD could come. Children also can develop tics at this age. The tics, again, this kind of looping in the nervous system, where they're kind of trying to control something in them. And the other one, which I didn't know, many children get warts on their fingers and toes around 9 years old. And he says it's an immunologic challenge that comes when children are working to determine what is part of me, which is that 9-year gesture. It's like, is this part of me? Or where if they might lash out and hit someone, but even down to the very immune system, which Dr. Blanning talks about is a tool of our our ego, our highest self is this immune system. Even that can start to question, who am I? And that creates warts on the fingers and toes. I thought that was fascinating. So you will see some of these things happen, and I guess you can be comforted that it's not as weird as you might think it is at first, or as scary, and you want to attend to it. Sometimes someone like Dr. Blanning can give some very gentle remedies that help through. Sometimes there's really, again, why I keep talking about why I like to give this talk, because the greatest remedy really is your attention, and you're able to reach in with a compassion and to understand a little bit about what they are going through. That's such a powerful remedy for them to be able to move through this challenging time. So there's one other little section I wanted to read to you. Toward the end of the 9th year, a whole range of questions arise in children's souls, and they all come from a new feeling of differentiation between self and the outer world, as well as from a feeling of separateness from their teacher as a person. He's speaking to educators in his lecture. Until now, children were barely aware of whether a teacher was a clumsy sort of person who might bump into desks and tables, or one who dropped pieces of chalk on the floor. It would not have occurred to children under 9 to react to this situation. True children would notice such an idiosyncrasy even before they completed the 9th year, but it would pass by without making a deeper impression. And he says, and then they'll forget about it in a few years too. They won't notice them again as they get into their older years. But for this time, they really notice these kind of things, these kind of changes that are happening. So we have Piaget, who is a famous educator and looked into child development. And he talks about this time, he calls ages 7 to 11 the concrete operational stage. And so there are interesting things. There's some logical thinking, and then he says conservation in 6 to 9 years, things like what they can learn, reversibility, reduced egocentricism, limits to abstract reasoning, improved classification, seriation, and transitive inference, 8 to 9 years. Which is interesting to read Rudolf Steiner and then to read kind of this more clinical aspect. Like it does, Piaget was, I think, a great observer of the human being and of children. And these are all things that, what they can learn and how they might be able to learn. But it doesn't get to why they're able to do these things. And I thought that was very interesting as I dug into these. Similarly, I looked into what Montessori and that learning, confidence, tackling large math problems, eagerness to explore science, history, ethics, government, and culture, increasing leadership in family life, projects, and peer groups, which are all things that could be gestures of them wanting to reach out into the world. And I think what we would say in the Waldorf school is at this 9-year change, you will find them eager to go out and do these things and reach out. And I would say that eagerness is a sign of them of being like, I'm separate in the world and wanting to define themselves. And they might quickly cling on to things that they see in the outside world without really having yet the capacity to develop a true relationship to and understanding. In our school, in 3rd and 4th grade, there's 2 big things I like to think of that, well, several things that reach the child. In 3rd grade, we teach the Hebrew stories as one of the big parts of 3rd grade. And in the Hebrew stories, you find this individual having a certain relationship to the divine, to God, in a new way, kind of, for human beings. So it's not that we're teaching a religion, but we're teaching this relationship of the individual to the divine, where instead of that there is kind of almost a back and forth between the individual and what you might call God. And that's that. And we also teach the creation stories of naming things, and you can see this individuality coming to shape. I always think of the story of Job, where Job has conversations with God. Like rarely in cultures do we find that, or you can even think in today's, that we can have a conversation that Job is speaking with and almost reasoning with a divine force, which is really unique, this picture of the individual now being able to speak to that. And there's something that the 9-year-old can relate to in that. And then in 4th grade, we have this beautiful thing of the Norse myths, where these characters, where the mythological characters in the Norse culture are very individualized, and they can be very rascally. They're not really super nice all the time. And that this real sense of these divine beings that are also really kind of rascally, which is very much kind of a 9-year-old saying, oh, I am both a human being, but I can kind of do what I want in the world. So there's these neat ways. And we also teach geography. Like in 4th grade, we have local geography. My son just did this, where they start with drawing kind of their desk. Like, here I am in my desk. And then they go, here's my classroom. And then we send them home and they have to draw a map of their bedroom. That they slowly are moving out and they say, oh, here I am in space. And we're supporting their development and their relationship to the world at this time, rather than just kind of giving them all the things that they're interested in at that time. That's one of the things with Montessori schools I read that I thought was interesting, that they can start to control the classroom, is what they said. I didn't go to Montessori school, but that's that gesture of this individuality, which I think they recognize in many in development, but how we give them kind of a comfortable place to be in, because that individuality is very raw still at 9 years old. So we try to do it, give them slowly a picture of their growing world and their relationship to humans, to the natural world, to the world that's around them, and to the world that might not be seen, something larger than them that might not be nameable quite yet. So that's with the 9-year change. Now let's take a minute so the 12-year change comes in the wake of, and then you get through the 9-year change, and then they get to 6th grade. And so this, my experience with the 12-year change, I've taught 6th grade a few times, spent a lot of time in middle school classrooms. What's happening in that 12-year change time is very inward. So you don't notice it. This 9-year change, you'll notice something happening. If you don't notice anything, that would be more cause for concern than their anxiety. If you're like, they seem totally fine, then you might want to check in. But at 12, they're like, no, I'm fine. While inwardly, this great tumult is happening within them. And I kind of have a joke about what Rudolf Steiner says about the 12-year change, because he says it's when they finally have the capacity to understand cause and effect. They have a new relationship to their, shift from kind of this relationship to their muscles, to their bones, which we do this physics, kind of we start things more in 7th grade, but they're starting to feel their way into their bones, and they can understand cause and effect, which I would say they first have the capacity to understand cause and effect. I've not yet seen a 6th grader who can truly understand cause and effect. That's kind of my thing, like, they don't get it. They don't get it. They're still like doing the same actions with the same reactions over and over and over again. But they have the capacity for that, and I think that really makes sense. And more than that is you see this change toward adolescence. And what I would say happens in the 12-year change, you will see it when they're 13 and 14 years old. You won't notice it as much happening when they are 12 years old. But it's helpful to know that it's happening, because it's happening. And then you'll see like, oh, that's what, a year later, 2 years later, in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, you'll start to see some of the fruits of that. So at that, and these are both what we call crossing the Rubicon. We're going into these new phases of development, and it's a process of greater and greater individuation or individualizing. So in that 12-year, there's a real kind of a morality that starts to come into play around 12 years old. And so again, we want to give them an environment that is supportive to that environment, where they're learning about the world around them and the natural laws of the world. Inner transformation. And so the more, So he says, young adolescents place themselves as earthly beings into the world of dynamics, richness, and experience. So they're really starting to understand the dynamics of the world. And that's also the dynamics of their soul life for the first time around age 12. And so again, like, what can you do? It's really be attentive to these things, continue to hold clear boundaries for the children, and healthy, loving boundaries, and slowly listen to and be able to converse with them on a more kind of companionship level, is one thing that Dr. Blaney talks about. Without over-intellectualizing and without adultifying everything we tell them. It's a fine line that we have. Because when you say around 9-year change, or even in similar around 12, question you might have, are you my real parents? Question that might come. And so how do you answer that? How do you not take things personally is another thing Dr. Blaney recommends. Don't take it personally. You know, it's hard. Yeah. Another thing, like, are you going to die? Death is another thing that comes big, especially around this 9-year change, because they're aware, like, oh my gosh, I'm a separate human. You're a separate human. That means you might die. And so how do we give them, I might die. Well, someday we are all going to die. You can give them a truth. You don't want to lie to them or tell them fake answers. But then you say, And if I do, I'll still be with you in so many ways, and I'll always be loving you. Give them these pictures that aren't untruths, but you don't want to over-intellectualize and talk to them. How does that feel for you? Tell me more about that. We don't want to kind of draw this adulty talking out of them. We want to address their questions in a healthy way. It also presents you as knowing and confident in whatever that, however hard that question might be. Like, well, is someone going to break into our house? I don't think they're going to break into our house. If they did, I'll protect you, or we'll be able to be okay, or will our car get broken? You know, these questions that they ask 9, 10, 11 years old, that you can give them clear answers for, not wash over them, but also give a confidence, say, yes, but things are going to be okay. If our car got broken into, then we would call the police, and we might have to get a new window or a new car. And so those kind of realities are okay, but we don't want to overdo all of the kind of how we're conversing with them. And as they get older, you give them little bits and a little more and more and more. And I think it's always important to remember, no matter what a 12-year-old is saying or acting like, 12 is so young still. Something I, as an elementary school teacher for a long time, I've caught myself losing sight of that as I spent a lot of time in the middle school, where 8th graders were kind of my version of adults. So that's who I spent all my time with, you know, like the oldest ones were the 8th grade, like, hey man, what's up? You know, that you get to that fate, because that's all my time is spent with these students, and they're like the old ones. But even 13, 14, they're really our children. They may have, even if some of them have reached like sexual maturity, so they have an adultness to them, I guess you could say. But they're still children, and 12-year-old is still very much a child. And that the more we can remember that as well, I think is hugely important. Yeah. So I'd like to, are there any questions or thoughts that have come up with this? I think this talk is always good when we get some reflections or some fears that may have arisen over this, or questions that have come up. Alex?
Having that memory of like cursing for a half hour and now knowing what you know as a parent and as a teacher, is there anything that somebody could have done or said in that time that would have maybe extended that period of a half hour in a way?
That's interesting. Yeah, because no adults knew I actually did that. Which I was probably a little sneaky. Like extended it in like not a good way, you mean?
Yes, like perpetuated it.
Yeah, I think that's where that question between what's a loving boundary and what's kind of an authoritarian boundary comes. I would guess if, just thinking of who I am, if someone were to tell me I couldn't do that or to come down on me in a hard way, then I probably would have pushed more, because I was trying to position myself as an individual in the world. And if you have kind of threatened my autonomy in that way, then I may have acted out in other ways to kind of continue to continue that journey of me showing that I was an individual. Does that make sense? And I can think of, I have very loving parents, wonderful parents, but I can say that my father still has, he's in his 80s though, he still has very authoritarian, I would give him a little bit of authoritarian quality to him, big Greek man. And I can think about when I was, up until I had this gesture from 7 to 14 of loving authority, my father was the perfect loving authority. He was super present, really clear boundaries, but very loving. But what I would say, if I were to be critical, and what I've learned as an educator, from 14 to 21, he kept that same gesture. And I was not having it anymore. And I had to work my way through that to my 50s. No, definitely up until in my mid-30s, where I had to work out my relationship to authority based on that gesture, which was very fitting for that time in my life from 7 to 14. And I feel very lucky that early developmental time, I had this very safe space to really grow into myself because I had this loving authority that was very present, but very clear about boundaries. But that once you hit the after 14, that relationship has to change, and it didn't change. He still has that with me, where I'm like, come on, I'm 50 years old, man. Like, I got this. I got a job and everything. So that's something to think about as far as like that gesture that you're speaking of, that there's really appropriate times and that these developmental pictures are really helpful for what's right at one time. Rudolf Steiner would go so far as to say, as there's not really a thing of evil, evil is the action in the wrong time and or the wrong place. That there are these gestures that happen that if you do them at certain times, they're perfect gestures. If you do them at another time, they are very harmful, and you could even say to the extent of evil gestures. So that rightness, yeah.
So what if this happens when your kid is 3 or 4 years old? What you're talking about?
It's perfect. Perfect. Great question. We can talk about this forever. Do you see this node here? That's a similar thing happening. It's a perfect time. You have these nodes in time. We say that when they're 3 is when they first say I for the first time often. I mean, they might play with the word I, but they can say I. And what else do they always say, age 2 and 3? No. And again, you can't take this personally. That's what even Dr. Blank talks about this. 2 to 3, my wife and I always joke, 2s were not bad for us. They say the terrible 2s. 2s were mellow. We're like, oh, we got this. And then 3 came. It's like, what's happening? It was so hard. 3 was really hard. So yeah, it's a similar gesture. It's an earlier node, an earlier version of them coming to an awareness of themselves as a being. They have these new capacities of being in the world, of walking and feeling the world in new ways. And so that gesture, it's an early precursor to this. You'll see these develop. I mean, we could go all the way up to in our 50s with midlife crisis. I mean, there's these nodes that happen which are the development of a similar gesture of who am I in the world? Who am I in the world? And we have midlife crisis between 42 and 49 most likely, where we're still saying, who am I in the world? And we're still saying, no! Right? And we're very critical of the world or whatever it might be. So, yeah, and it's a similar thing. You're still giving loving boundaries. You're not entering into conversation with them, right? You know, it's a simpler version. Like, this is what we are doing. Mm-hmm. Yep, here we are. That's what we're moving through here. Yes, it's very hard, isn't it? So, yeah, does that help? Yeah, it's very, very normal. Again, you'll see something between 5 and 6 again. It keeps happening. These developmental years, you'll see these nodes happen. And it will happen. You'll see them grow a little bigger and a little more complex. 9 is the most glowing, I would argue, the most glowing of those changes because they really find themselves as an individual for the first time. Really. And the image that I gave, that I like to give, that I carry in my imagination during the hardest times working with 9-year-olds, like if you're class teaching in 3rd or 4th grade and you have a room full of them, you go, oh my God. And you need that compassion, this image that I carry. I think of them, I grew up on the water, I grew up on the water a lot of time on boats and things, and I can think of that 9-year-old as they're out on this little boat, like a little 9-foot dinghy that has just drifted way out into the sea. It's almost like they were asleep as they drifted out. And then they wake up, and it's dark, and they're alone on this boat, and they're just bobbing in the sea, and they look around, and there's nothing to be seen on that ship. That's kind of the image that I carry as like my deepest kind of place of compassion. And there's a gesture of that in the 9-year-old when they're going through this, just like, oh, I mean, to use adult language, like, oh shit. Where did everybody go? You know, here I am alone. So that's kind of, yeah.
That was great. I feel so much more compassion.
Gotta dig down sometimes.
What about teeth? Are they still going? They're going to continue to lose teeth for how long? I guess.
Yeah, it's funny. Adam wrote about that in here. Let's see. I actually wrote in a WebMD or Kaiser Permanente. This one came from about where it said about. Have lost by age 9, have lost some of their baby teeth. These are replaced by permanent teeth. So they could keep losing teeth up until, we have 6th graders, I think, that are still losing teeth. Yeah, that really depends on where the child is. And I think it's good to pay attention to, though, kind of where their teeth are. Can't force their teeth to go anywhere. So their teeth are kind of telling you where, if that child is like, okay, you're hanging out in childhood a little longer. Okay, here we go.
I had wondered whether there was a correlation between where they are developmentally.
I would say yes. Personally, yeah, I would say yes. And I think if we can look at it anthroposophically, that the forces that are still needing to work on their teeth have not really entirely been liberated for other parts of their development, especially their thinking capacities and their capacity for memory. It hasn't quite. Yeah, that's what I would say. Lori?
I just would add to that,
Yeah.
that a lot of children are losing their teeth at 5 and young, very young. So for 1st grade readiness, we also look for are the molars coming in, those 6-year-old molars, which also have a real significance because teeth are coming out very early.
Interesting. Yeah.
I was wondering about the difference of boys and girls, since we have one daughter, Sydney, we have a ton of kids on our block, and lately I kind of lost it the other day because the girls are getting hit by punching from boys. Yeah, and so I'm like, where? And some of these kids, one of the boys is, I think, pretty sensitive. I know he is, and he's run in when something's happened. So I was curious if you have anything, or if that's a more recent thing because of what's in the world.
Yeah, are they around this? What age are they all?
So 10, Sydney's 10 and me 13. And I was like, I don't understand boys are boys, but you guys can do what you want, but why are the girls? My husband.
The girls are getting hit or the girls are hitting?
Getting hit.
They're getting hit by the boys?
Yes.
That sounds very normal.
Okay. Curious.
And not that it's good, but that's where boundary, creating, I think, I'd say yes, kind of all the reasons why. One, there's developmentally, if it's, I would say, a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old boy, them stating who they are or their affection for someone can, I don't want to embarrass myself too much. But I definitely thought that was how you're affectionate when I was in middle school, was by either making fun of or being kind of attacky to girls. Just very based on confusion and lack of understanding. And I could have used some more boundaries around that at that age. But I think also the general angst in the world, my expertise is in movement and movement therapy and teaching movement. And the children today don't have as many opportunities to meet the world in healthy movement ways. There's not as much tumbling down hills, not as much wrestling with parents or older brothers in a way that's not harmful. I didn't see it in our house. When they do wrestle, it tends to get aggressive really quick rather than having this kind of being able to wrestle in a healthy, tumbly way. So I think there is a lot of that. There's just less opportunity for that. So I always try to say, what ways can we give them opportunities to be rough and tumble? One of my old mentors get a refrigerator box from Home Depot and put them in it and have them roll down a hill in a refrigerator box. But these kind of things, it's just kind of one of those old school ways that we need to give them more opportunity rather than always saying no. Of course, we have to lay a boundary with aggression. That aggression towards someone or harming someone is not okay. But we also, at the same time, have to give them opportunities because that reaching out, especially around this time, they're trying to define themselves, and the way they're defining themselves is up against something physical. And if they only have video games and car drives, then they need more opportunities for that, where they're going to find it themselves, which is the girls in the neighborhood might be the thing, rather than healthy wrestling or healthy tumbling.
Somebody posted an older video recently of a psychologist or someone in the family actually showing how to do that play,
Yeah.
like rolling around but not being aggressive, but just getting.
Yeah, that's part of our movement curriculum in grades 1 through 4 especially, is healthy wrestling that's not aggressive and has very clear boundaries, so they can really push up against each other. So that would be. I saw a couple of hands here. Did you have something? I saw you went.
It was sort of an observation and a question.
Yeah.
As like we come into sibling world, I'm sure lots of other people are too. Is there a second? The boundary, I think it, just reflecting personally growing up, great boundaries, wonderful loving parents, except for the violence. And what was interesting is how you just brought that up, like you need to give opportunities. And a lot of times it'll manifest between your closest friends and your brother or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Like this need to sort of butt heads.
Yeah.
And how my boundaries were so strong and so strict with that it was like the end of the world if I touched him, right? And there wasn't any space for that at all. And it created, I don't want to say animosity, but it created this weird relationship between me and my brother that's lasted forever. Like, I don't know that we're ever going to get over it. We're never going to be as close as the brothers that were allowed to rough and tumble.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting sort of like reflection that I, talked to them about. I've been honest. I'm like, guys, you screwed this up.
Yeah. It's a hard one. We deal with it every night in our house. We're like, okay, yeah, that's okay, okay, all right. You're choking him. Stop where we see one of them getting really angry. And there's like lashing out. That's like, that's not about your brother. Let's put that somewhere else. So it's hard. It's a hard boundary to play with, but it's necessary to work that out.
Yeah, the fact that it might even be bad in many ways, but it actually is serving. Like there was the rule of hedonics, right? Like when you're angry, it feels bad, but it's hedonically positive. Right. Like you're trying to show you care by being angry. When you can't be angry,
it just gets,
the reverse happens.
Right. I saw some more,
Is there a way to give a foundation or support heading into 9 without adultifying or maybe expanding boundaries or softening boundaries? Like, what advice could you give to parents who are heading into it? And good
luck. Go get them, Tiger. I'd hesitate to give too much other than just kind of what you would do, just continuing with healthy, safe boundaries and loving nourishment, and because we want them to go through it. It's kind of like the evidence about fever now, that anthroposphic medicine has talked about fever for a long time, and now the American Pediatricians Association is saying, don't, unless you get to, I forget the number, over 104, don't medicate for fever. We want them to go through this change. Kind of what you're saying too, we want them to go through it. That's what helps them become healthy individuals. And as Dr. Blank said very nicely in this article, the world needs healthy individuals right now, more and more, because there's more forces out there that are working working against the individual in terms of decision making, and so just the power of advertisement and digital media that make these decisions, please. And we need strong individuals who have a true moral sense that comes from within them. So I'd be hesitant to prep too much.
Or maybe prep the parents. Like
That's why I give these talks. Just be ready. And that's what that inward gesture is. That when you see it coming, you're prepared. You know that this is coming, and you know these changes are natural, and you're not going right to your pediatrician and a panic disorder. You're not going to a therapist right away.
So maybe just like softening expectations of the child while like remaining present and loving.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a funny balance, because inwardly you might be softening your expectations, but you still have to hold a clear boundary for them. They still have to brush their teeth before bed, and they're going to say no, and they're going to say, I'm not doing that. That's what my son says. I'm not doing that. I'm just like, oh, you didn't. Well, I'm like a grade school teacher, you know, so I'm like, you don't say that to your teacher. And now I'm all a dad, so I have to do it a little differently, but I'm still like, yeah, we have to brush our teeth. You know, instead of me exploding at him or something, you know, but I'm still holding that. But inwardly, I'm like, God, it's really hard for him to brush his teeth or even say yes to anything I'm asking him because he's trying to stay so hard that he's an individual. And that's really important for him to do that. So I have to create space for that while also saying, and these are things that have to happen. And you're still in this loving embrace of your family that is guiding you through this development. Does that, it's a constant play. I would say there's not I would also caution about lowering expectations because they need you to still hold them to their utmost all the time. Is that?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
So mine's sort of, as we have this individual, especially as we go through the Hebrew teachings in third grade, this greater sense of self and the rest of the world emerging, and particularly with the rest of the world being so cheery and full of so many landmines, introducing, and there's so many pieces of advice of if children are young enough to suffer from this, other children must know, or don't give trauma before it's due. And where do we meet that developmental space of there's so much unsafety in the world without taking that into a not age-appropriate expression, or even in a family coming from an addiction background where those circles get tighter and tighter. Thoughts from the anthroposophic point of view?
Yeah.
To my very lighthearted question.
Right. I would say it's vital that the developing child feels a sense of safety in the world. I would say the gesture we talk about in Waldorf schools from 0 to 7 is one that the world is good. So we want the child in this period where they're developing from 0 to 7 to have this feeling in their surroundings that the world is good. And that means inwardly we have to know that indeed the world is good.
Even in the expression and gesture of the world is perhaps otherwise.
Yeah, yep. We have to, that's our work as adults, to dig deep and to know that the world is indeed good. And then 7 to 14, that gesture is the world is beautiful. So where do you allow beauty to be recognized and expressed in the world of the child? And I often think about a lot of these harder things is as harder things come, we talk about this in terms of technology, as like say technology and when they're older, there's more AI or there's more digital media. What are we doing to counter that? Rudolf Steiner speaks about the sub-earthly forces of electronics in the digital world, and that's coming and we can't stop that, and so we have to work with what you call supra-earthly forces. So how do we reach higher and give pictures of these really higher things to counter? So if you're in an environment where they need to there's hard truths that they may experience, whether we like it or not, what ways can we give them the polar picture of that to help them still hold this gesture that the world is good, the world is beautiful, and then when they're older, the world is true. There's truth in the world. So that would be my thing. We can't control everything they experience, but we can control what we can give them pictures to balance out whatever darkness that they might, or challenges that they might experience. Does that help at all?
A little, yeah.
I was thinking about this, interestingly, we were down in Albuquerque, New Mexico this weekend, and I went down to get some things at the store. My family was at the house, and the sunset. Okay, you ever been in New Mexico? It's just like a normal day, and the sunset was just electric, this glowing sky in the west, and I was just standing in the middle of the street in Albuquerque, like outside the co-op there. It's like I couldn't stop looking at it. And it's just how lucky I am that I get to be standing here in this beautiful sunset. And then I was thinking about my children get to see these beautiful places. And then all this chaos could be happening. And there's a shirtless guy walking 100 yards away, like stumbling down the street. And here I am watching this beautiful sunset, and that my children get to experience this type of beauty and goodness. And so working with balancing those. Is that too?